The most romantic proposal ever. Surprise treasure hunt. Andrea and Lewis. That summer, to be precise, was 2014. The summer Andrea first crossed paths with Lewis Kelly. A summer of first love, unforgettable sunsets and, later, a crushing first heartbreak. Back then, Andrea was 14, kind of boy crazy and on vacation in Clearwater Beach, Florida, with a bunch of friends and family. Andrea had lived in Florida since moving there from Puerto Rico as a young kid. But while it was familiar territory, there was something different about hanging out in the Sunshine State on a vacation versus being there during the school year. Andrea and her friends quickly befriended the other teenagers staying at the hotel. Then, the group whiled away days at the beach, laughing and joking together until the sun sank through the cloudless sky into the ocean. While most of the kids at the hotel were from the U.S., there was one notable exception, a 16-year-old Irish boy called Lewis Kelly. Unlike the American teenagers, Lewis kept himself to himself, spending his days hanging out with his parents and sunbathing by the pool. But unbeknownst to Lewis, he was the talk of the resort. The fact he was from Ireland was both intriguing and swoon-worthy to the American teenagers, especially Andrea. She'd spend all day thinking about Lewis, stealing glances whenever she spotted him across the pool. I was obsessed with One Direction when I was younger, Andrea tells CNN Travel Today. So as soon as I saw this Irish boy, I was like, oh my God, he's my Neil. It was true that Lewis shared an accent with One Direction's Niall Horan. But he was much quieter than any boybander. He seemed aloof, a loner, as Andrea thought back then. She couldn't figure out how she'd ever get talking to him. But she kept daydreaming all the same. I was telling my friends about how cute I thought he was, recalls Andrea. I was watching him whenever we were at the restaurants. On one occasion, Andrea was gazing at Lewis as they both sat on opposite sides of the hotel pool. Lewis was unaware, preoccupied with his lunch. Then, a seagull swooped down out of the air, grabbed the cookie I was about to place into my mouth, grabbed it from my hands, Lewis tells CNN Travel. Andrea saw the whole thing from across the pool, and she started laughing. I didn't even notice that she started laughing because I was so shocked that I just got robbed by a bird. While Lewis was oblivious, Andrea's friend wasn't. She side-eyed her as Andrea giggled. All right, said Andrea's friend. Enough is enough. We're going to talk to him. Andrea protested, but it was too late. Her friend had already grabbed her arm and was making a beeline for Lewis. I was like, no, please, recalls Andrea. But then we went up to each other. And it was obviously perfect. Andrea and Lewis hit it off instantaneously, first laughing about the seagull and the cookie, then chatting about Ireland and the U.S. Right away, it was obvious that Lewis was less of a loner, and more just the odd one out among a group of American teenagers, and a bit too shy to introduce himself to the other kids unprompted. Heartened by this, Andrea suggested they could all hang out later that day, at the hotel's lounge. Lewis said he'd definitely swing by. I just thought she was going to be a friend, says Lewis. And then, obviously, that didn't happen. We became a lot more than friends. Still, this didn't happen right away. When Lewis made it to the lounge that day, the other teenagers flocked to him before Andrea could even say hi. Everyone was all over him, like, oh my God, your accent is so cute, she says. Everyone was obsessed with him, creating a circle around him. Andrea sat back. She didn't want to be one of the crowd. She wanted a meaningful, one-on-one chat with Lewis. Later that evening she worried she'd missed her chance. But now that Lewis was part of the gang, he and Andrea had plenty of time to get to know each other over the next few days. We gradually hung out a little bit by a little bit, says Lewis. Then, after a week, we started realizing we liked each other. I mean, I knew I liked him, says Andrea, laughing. He had to realize. They shared their first kiss in the rain. They went for walks on the beach. They swam in the pool together. But their happiness was tempered by the knowledge that their summer romance would be fleeting. Lewis lived in Ireland, Andrea lived in the US. Sure, they could try and keep in contact. But they were teenagers with no means to travel across the world to visit one another. It was hard to see how it could work out. He told me he loved me right before he got his bus to the airport, says Andrea. And I hadn't even thought about love. At that point, I was 14. I was like, what? He loves me. This means he's my first love. What is happening? Andrea was so overwhelmed by the thought that she didn't say the words back until Lewis had already started to walk away. She said them anyway, under her breath. From first love to first heartbreak. Now on different continents, Andrea and Lewis stayed in touch via Facebook Messenger and Skype. It was doable at first. But then Lewis traveled to the Irish countryside with a group of friends and had no internet access while he was there. When Andrea didn't hear from him, she assumed he'd forgotten about her. He didn't let me know that he wasn't going to have Wi-Fi, she says. I just thought I was being ghosted. Although Andrea felt she and Lewis were supposed to be in love forever, she figured he saw her as just a summer fling. So, she sent him a message that was more like a paragraph, essentially saying, "This is actually not okay, what you're doing. I'm not going to deal with it." In the message Andrea sounded definitive, like she knew what she wanted and what she wouldn't put up with. But in reality, she was a 14-year-old going through her first heartbreak. For months afterward, Andrea cried every day. For the first good year, I was literally head over heels, absolutely in love, she recalls. Even like a year later, I remember I had a New Year's kiss with someone, and I felt so bad. I was like, it's not Lewis, I'm betraying Lewis. Even though, literally, we hadn't been together for months. But it felt like a betrayal. Time went on. Obviously, after years go by, it becomes a little bit less intense, says Andrea. But even so, she still thought about Lewis often. They each remained vaguely aware of one another, privy to social media updates but not knowing much else. For a while, Lewis went through a period of sending Andrea constant Snapchats. They left her conflicted. I remember, it would just bring back all the feelings, she says. It was really upsetting because I was like, we're not together. It's been years. Andrea sent Lewis a text, asking him to rein in the Snapchats. You're a blast from the past that I don't want to remember, she wrote. Despite this, Andrea says she was still totally obsessed with Lewis. That's why she'd often find herself thinking about summer 2014 and daydreaming. She wouldn't dwell on the sad ending, and would just revisit the memories of the happy, sun-drenched haze. Lewis didn't fully let go of Andrea either. Throughout the years, randomly, Andrea would pop into my head, he says. On one such occasion, in 2017, Lewis typed a note to himself in his iPhone, "I will marry Andrea Camila." The action felt instinctual. The note felt like a premonition. Despite this feeling of certainty, Lewis didn't reach out to Andrea. By then, it had been years since they'd messaged directly. Lewis just felt weirdly sure he and Andrea would just reunite, eventually.